Welcome back to Advancing with Amy, Mental Health Warrior and Neurospicy Mama. Today we're talking with Melissa Crook. Let me tell you a little bit about Melissa. Melissa is a woman in her 50s just like me, and she currently lives in Fresno, California with the great love of her life, her best friend, her spouse, and the father of their children, Brady Crook. Melissa loves her husband, her daughters, her son-in-law, the beach, the lake. She loves sunsets, mountains. She said you can take a woman out of the Pacific Northwest, but you can't take the Pacific Northwest out of the woman. She also loves the WSU Cougars, the 49ers, the Dodgers, and the Olympics, especially track. She's passionate, driven, loyal, fierce, and brave. She believes in justice, mercy, equality, and empathy for all. Melissa is available to speak to your group about the importance of women understanding their value and worthiness when it comes to prioritizing their self-care and overall health. She speaks to the steps she has used in her own experience to set healthy boundaries and embrace her beautiful and complex layers. All right, so we're here with Melissa Crook today. And Melissa, you've got your own podcast. Would you like to tell us about that?
Yeah, I do. Thank you so much, Amy, for having me. It's great to be here. I have a podcast called the F.E.E.L podcast. And F.E.E.L is an acronym. It stands for Finding Empowerment, Embracing Layers. And this was really just born out of my own journey of hitting a wall at age 50 and being forced to reckon with things I hadn't dealt with when it comes to how I'm taking care of myself, seeing the connection between emotional, mental, and physical health, and releasing the lie that was my job to show up for everyone all the time and be everything to everyone. And be like, no, that's not your job. That's codependent and that's people pleasing. Your job is to take care of you. And if you take care of you first and come out and show up as your best self, that's better for everyone. It's one, you're worth it. Your value is not determined by how much output you put into the world. Your value is innate. You were born with value. And we don't hear that as women. And I was like, we're going to start having conversations. And through conversations with my own family members and women close to me, I came up with 8 talking points and a couple of key questions that I'm like, I think if we focus in on these things, and we're all going to have to find our way through how we do that. Everyone's got to find the self-care that works for them. Everyone's got to figure out where it is they need those healthy boundaries, how to communicate expectations. We've all got to find that way. We've got to figure out those self-care practices that resonate with us. So it's not a magic, bullet or a magic formula or pill, but it is a framework and a map to ask yourself as a woman these questions. And it does a couple of things. If you're asking yourself these things and starting to apply them to your life, seeing yourself as worthy and valuable of them, it enables you to look at all the layers of your life, give yourself grace, realize that sometimes we just do the best we can in the situation we're in. And maybe it's not the right thing, but it was the best we could at that time. And instead of beating ourselves up for it, releasing it, accepting it, and continue, and, just accepting we're going to continue to grow and evolve. But I think as women, if we're going to change stigmas, how women are viewed in the world, all the things that get in the way, there's so many layers. And my network's called the Embracing Layers Network because we all have so many layers. And it takes a processing of emotions and moving through it and getting to these layers and accepting them. And then we can support other women in doing that too. But I think it's we as a collective of women have to be having these conversations and showing up together in order to change these narratives and stigmas that are out there when it comes to our mental health, emotional health, physical health, our sexual health, our just, menopause and periods and abuses and diagnoses. I mean, I finally accepted the fact, my husband had been hinting at it for years, that I think there's an issue going on with anxiety here that needs to be addressed to get some help with. And so, at the ripe old age of 51, I got officially diagnosed with an anxiety. I don't even like the word disorder. It's just part of my makeup and who I am. through a lot of tales. And if I address it and acknowledge it and name it, then I can have tools. But there's so many years, and I don't have to tell you this, that there were so many stigmas around these things. We were afraid to say out loud that we had these diagnoses because of what we might be viewed as, or people might think, or all the limitations and expectations that go with these diagnoses. So that was a really long way to explain. I wanted to start having conversations with women about these things. And like I said, we use 8 talking points and a couple of key questions that we walk through, but I also introduce women by their character traits and not by what they do, because I want us to have a very clear understanding. That is our identity. That is who we are. It's not our roles. Those things are important. We all have roles and responsibilities and titles and ways that we show up in the world, but those things will ebb and flow. Who we are at the core, what our character traits are and our values are, that make us up who we are. And so getting the emphasis back on that, because you find so many times that a season ends, and if someone is really identified with that season, all of a sudden they're lost. They don't know who they are anymore because they haven't, gotten in touch with that. But that's the work that I do. We have a radio show now where we expand on those conversations on internet radio. And then we have a book coming out based on the first 4 seasons. Are an incredible guest, and all they offered up with ways to engage with each of the talking points. And our writer, Jessica, has put in her own touch on it with the blog she's written about our episodes over the years. It's just, what can we do? You're doing it. What can we do to bring attention to these conversations and open up the dialogue and give safe places for people to talk about it and land and realize they're not alone?
I think as women, we come from a place where when we get older, we used to be considered obsolete. And now more women are standing up and talking and coming into their own. As women in our 50s, you just expressed this, and I'm going through the same thing. I feel more at ease with who I am in my 50s than I have my whole entire life.
Yeah, I 100% agree.
Yeah, so I want to go back to something you said about anxiety. We have a lot of listeners that suffer from anxiety. Can you tell me how that shows up in your life?
Yeah, for me, growing up, I came up in a very emotionally chaotic household. And so I was the oldest, only daughter and oldest in my family. And so I became very aware very early, at an early age, of being aware of the emotional temperature in the room and the volatility, and what could I do? What could I help my younger brothers do to avoid or minimize chaos, or what we could control, or know just when to leave the room. And so that created a sense of hyper-vigilance. And I think, I'm not the only one with an anxiety diagnosis in my family. So this is something that was there, but was also fostered by a lot of this chaos. And so for me, it shows up as tightness in my chest and shallow breathing and just my body just seizing up. But it really shows, like, it'll sit in my chest. I can feel it when it's rising up. My blood pressure will go up. And so I haven't had one in a while, knock on wood, but I will have an anxiety attack every so often that will be all of those things, plus almost this out of body experience. And I really have to I know now, if I start breathing, if I do mindfulness exercises to get myself present and not let myself panic of why is my heartbeat rushing? Why is my breathing shallow? Why is my chest so tight? Why am I having this outer body experience? I know now what it is, and I kind of get in front of it. But I also know the things that lead up to it. If I've overscheduled, overcommitted, overpromised, I go back into some of those old habits of codependency and hypervigilance and don't stay aware of that, this will happen. And I really didn't have them until I probably started in my mid to late 40s in a smaller sense. And I think this was all has been wrapped up in my menopause journey as well. All those things kind of hit at once. And what I've learned is all those emotions, all those traumas, circumstances that you didn't process or move through emotionally, they're stored in your body. And over time, your body's going to be like, we can't hold all of this anymore. It's got to be released. It's got to be moved through. And if you don't move through it in a healthy way and aren't able to name it and identify it, it'll show up in some very, and scary ways. And for me, that included these anxiety episodes. And that's how I ended up in the ER twice in the fall of 2019 when I was 50. My blood pressure was through the roof. My heart was racing. I thought I was having a heart attack. I mean, I just didn't know what was happening. And after 2 times of this happening, had us every organ looked at, wore a heart monitor for a month, all the things. And it came down to, you've got a lot of unprocessed stuff happening here. You have got, there is a lot of anxiety built up in your body. And you need to get some resources to help you walk this out because it's affecting you physically. And so for me, it's also very performance based. I mean, it's very, if I feel like I'm going to let somebody down from a how well I'm doing something standpoint, it rises up. And most of the stuff I think is so interesting. There's thoughts in your head, and then there's thoughts that are true. And there's so many thoughts. My mind just starts racing. The other thing that I have that goes with the anxiety is a form of OCD intrusive thoughts. Like the intrusive thoughts are alive and well, and more so when I'm got a lot going on and I feel like I'm up against it, deadlines. And a lot of these things are just in my own head. They aren't real. They aren't true, but that's how it's showed up for me. And that really started for me when I was probably 8 years old, but I just didn't realize what was happening. I didn't have a name for it. And so it's manifested in different ways throughout my life, but currently that's how that shows up. I've been in therapy for over 4.5 years now. For the third time, I finally got to a point, I think, where my nervous system felt safe enough to dive in and start unpacking all of the things that were impacting my life and amplifying this anxiety.
Right. So your children had moved out and you had time to deal with this.
That's exactly what happened. And that's exactly when it hit. It's so interesting you say that. That is it. I mean, my daughters were all grown, 2 in college, 1 was already out of college and had just gotten married at that point. So there was finally space for me. And that's exactly what my husband said, is like, I think your body's like, hello, I'm here. We've got the time now. Let's pay attention. You've got nobody that you're taking care of to get in your way of stopping you from doing this, because I put everybody else and everything else first. I mean, I had a physical workout regime in terms of I was a runner since I was 12, but I didn't have really any other mindfulness things going on. Like, I got a lot of benefits from the running, but for my mental and emotional health as a result of just doing it. But it cleared my body and cleared enough out of my body, I think, to keep it going for a long time. But I still wasn't addressing and diving into things that needed to be dove into.
So it was allowing you to maintain the status quo, but not to evolve or grow at all.
Exactly. Yeah. I think you just when you're young, that's just your life. You don't know any different. So you're just doing what you need to do to survive. And it's not until later, if you take the time to think about it, if you take the time to unpack it, and not everybody does. I mean, I consider myself fortunate that I had the space and the resources to do that, because once I stopped it made sense. Like, once I started connecting the dots, I'm like, oh, okay. Not to mention looking at the patterns in my family, both from a mental health standpoint and just generational trauma, things that had been passed on. My parents had no emotional maturity resources, and they both came from their own trauma and their backgrounds, and they just carried it into their lives together. And it really created chaos because neither one of them had a clue to do with what to do with their own feelings, let alone their kids or anybody else's. And I think that, we weren't talking about this in when we were growing up. There were no resources for that. There were a lot of stigmas and there was a lot of expectations and there was a lot, but there were no conversations about it. And you certainly weren't going to tell anyone that you were going to therapy because only quote unquote, crazy people went to therapy or got help. And my dad was very concerned about how other people viewed our family. We were not to discuss outside of our family any problems or issues that were happening. It was very important to put on a good face. And so my parents interacted very different publicly than they did in our house a lot of times.
Oh, I totally get that. My family was completely different on the inside of my house than on the outside.
When I start having conversations with other people about this and realizing how prevalent this has been, and I think our generation, as we've gotten into our 50s and are finally just like, no more, we're not living like this. There's got to be a better way to do this for us and for the next generation. I just, I want my daughters to have all the information and feel free. And they have done their own work. They've done a really good job of seeing but 'cause my husband has his own, you know, traumatic background. And we both brought a lot into our relationship with that. Some things we were aware of and got on top of, and some things they had to live with us that we are able to name now, but they've seen that. And so they've gone early on, gone on their own journeys of uncovering, realizing the things they don't want to move forward. But it's such a more open conversation.
I agree. It's definitely better now than it was, but there is still stigma out there.
It is. It comes and it's sometimes it's stronger than others, but it's always kind of present as kind of a hum in the background. So I think what I have to do, I have to interrupt the cycle. Like, nope, I'm not going to Google about that bodily sensation. That is not based on truth. That is based on this. And so having to, because it shifted as the areas that it's focused on throughout my life. Ever since my mid 40s, it's focused on physical sensations in my body or things that are happening in my body. So like over focused on, and I think as I did more work and moved out of disassociation and started actually staying present, my mind almost went the other way where it notices every single thing, whereas I didn't notice anything for years. And so managing that and it's really just comes down to a control mechanism. I lived so much for so long waiting for the other shoe to drop then I was like, I'm gonna control every single element I can because there's so many things that are gonna happen that are out of my control. And yeah, so that's really how I proceeded, and that just amped that up even more. So it's I'm aware of it now. I'm realizing now, like, oh, these are thoughts, not truth. And things are going to happen with my health and my body because we're all going to get older. But every single thing that I'm feeling is not a threat.
Exactly. Your brain actually lies to you. So you have to figure out when you can trust your brain because they want to go back to the status quo. They want everything to be level and the same as it's always been.
We really do because the nervous system is funny. The nervous system is used to how you've been. And so when you change, it's going to send you alarm signals that it's unsafe when just because it's not what it's used to. And so you really have to be patient with that and realize it's just not used to this new way of being. And you really almost have to have this conversation with yourself of like, thank you for how you've served me for the times that I needed you to show up that way. I don't need that anymore. I'm safe, you know, but it's an ongoing thing. And I've gotten a lot better about not Googling everything. I'm not perfect at it, but I've gotten better and catching it. And I'm like, oh, this is what is happening right now. Naming that, interrupting it, and sometimes just getting up and doing something different to disrupt the cycle.
Yeah, it's so easy to spiral out of control with Dr. Google. Um, I do that too, and it gets really scary really quick.
It is hard, and I had to get used to the point of, like, what is it that I really need to talk to my doctor about, and what is it that is just my body being my body, and this really isn't a threat, and I just, ate something that disagreed with me. And it's not actually a really long-term problem.
Yeah, I've been to the hospital a couple times for things that I was really worried about and turned out to be nothing.
Mine was acid reflux when that happened to me. Acid reflux, and it just made I needed to make a shift in my diet and do some things and just pay attention to my triggers. And it's hurts, it's painful. You're like, what is happening here? But I think the biggest thing for me that has been important is like thoughts are not truth. And I came from a pretty conservative faith background growing up. I grew up in a Mormon home. And with that, and I left that when I was in my early 20s. But with that came a lot of like, this is right, this is wrong. And a lot of fear of being wrong, being bad. And so I, from an early age, was mistaking these OCD thoughts for the Holy Spirit telling me something. And I had to discern that and take that apart as an adult in therapy. And that was a very interesting to like, if this is fear based, that's not from God. You know, it really pulling that apart. So that played a very interesting role in all of this too. I heard the narratives and it was terrifying because there was like, there's nothing I can do to save myself. It's like, that's not, I've really had to unravel all of that over the years and be like, no, that is not, that is weaponizing the faith spaces have a history of weaponizing these things to control people and narratives. And I've really had to pull that apart. I'm like, that is not what a loving God would do or say. It's just not. That's just not. That's the control mechanism. And, and pulling that apart too and removing the fear from that. Cause there was so much fear of like, if I, for years, I read all the Bible verses about anxiety and prayed over them and do not be anxious, all that. And thought for years, really beat myself up. I'm like, I'm just not faithful enough. If I was faithful enough, I wouldn't feel anxious anymore. And I'm just not faithful enough. I read every book, did every Bible study, and finally had to release that that is not what that was meant to do for me. And had to really get into the context of what that meant and that this was not a problem of my faith. This was a problem of history, trauma, and of this in my family, and all of these things, and remove that fear-based spiritual aspect of it because people would feed me, people I knew, friends, they meant well, but they would feed me these verses over and over again. And I've done everything but stand on my head, so what am I doing wrong? Where am I not being faithful enough? And that was something I really had to unpack and move through and walk away from. That was very difficult. And that was with me for probably 30 years. We're having more conversations and the awareness that is happening. And one of my staff members is doing work specifically in her faith space to take stigmas off mental health discussions in the faith spaces, and that going to therapy is actually a good thing. We're given all kinds of gifts and we're asked and called to and feel inclined to use these gifts in different ways. And some of those gifts include those that are therapists that can help people. And instead of looking at it as something, I think in past generations, it's been like, you're not faithful enough, or there's something wrong with you, or if you did this or that. And removing that, like, no, this is just another resource for us to use that these people, and you find the person that works for you, but these people have been gifted with the ability to help people with this. And so she's doing a whole thing for young Black women specifically that in her spaces that I think is going to really change the narrative. But again, those 20 somethings are powerful. They're having these conversations. They've learned from what they've seen from us, I think, and they're really putting things in motion.
Melissa, this has been a fascinating conversation, and I've really enjoyed spending time with you today. Do you have any words of wisdom for our listeners?
Now, words of wisdom, I think, is just be kind and gracious with yourself and remember that you are valuable. Your value is not based on how much you perform, how many things you get done, how many things are checked off your item, if you're first place or last place. You were born as a woman with innate value. Honor that value. Be proud of that value. Take care of yourself. Remember that if you prioritize yourself, fill your cup, give yourself what you need to be well, you're not only going to be the best authentic version of yourself that you deserve to be, but you're going to show up better in life with everyone in your relationships, your workspaces, if you're a parent, a daughter, whatever it is you are. And then remembering your journey and giving empathy and support to other women on their journeys as well. But I think that comes from that place of us understanding our own value.
I love that. Definitely want to embrace our own value. So, tell me, where can our listeners find you?
Yeah, so go to embracinglayers.com and that will give you all the links. But the F.E.E.L podcast can be found on Spotify, Apple, all the normal places. It's F.E.E.L, it's an acronym. So F.E.E.L, instead of just the word feel. But yeah, you can find it there. But you go to embracinglayers.com. You're going to find how to follow us on socials. That's also got our podcasts on there. There's blogs. We have resources from all of our guests that have been on, that we've talked with over the years. And we've talked with guests from all kinds of backgrounds, from mental health backgrounds, physical health, emotional health, and just friends of mine that have been on the journey together. And there's a whole page that leaves all the resources that they find helpful and supportive to them. So, and then information about our book and our radio show, everything's there at embracinglayers.com.
That's great. Now, remind me what your book is called.
Our book is called Embracing Layers Unapologetically. And it is going to, like I said, it's going to be set at Amazon and you'll get it directly in the mail to you. But it's a great book for book clubs to do with other women because we give ways to engage at the end of each chapter so that you can really support each other and challenge each other to take good care of yourself and prioritize your health and give each other the support and resources that you need to do that.
That sounds great, Melissa. I'm definitely going to have to check that out. So thank you again. I hope you have a good evening.
Thank you so much, Amy, for having me. Thank you for what you do here. You're having such important conversations, and I'm really looking forward to having you. I'm going to record with you 2025, but I'm looking forward to our conversation too. But thank you for your work. All of us doing this work together. This is how we shift narratives and make changes.
I agree 100%. And again, thank you so much for coming on today. I will be talking to you later.
All right. Take care.
All right. As we wrap up this insightful episode of Advancing with Amy, mental health warrior and neurospicy mama, we want to extend a huge thank you to Melissa Crook for sharing her empowering journey and wisdom with us. Melissa's dedication to fostering conversations about mental health and self-care, especially for women, has been both inspiring and enlightening. If you're looking to delve deeper into these topics, be sure to check out her podcast, the F.E.E.L podcast. F.E.E.L is an acronym, F.E.E.L. And this is where Melissa continues to explore the layers of empowerment and self-discovery. You can find all the links and resources mentioned today, including Melissa's book, Embracing Layers Unapologetically, at embracinglayers.com. I'll put all the links in the show notes. And before you go, if you enjoyed today's conversation, please take a moment to rate, review, and share this episode with your friends and community. Your support helps us continue to bring these important conversations to life. Thank you for joining us. And remember, embracing your own value is a powerful step toward living a fulfilled and authentic life. Until next time, stay empowered, take care, and keep advancing, warriors.